Homer's like driving on a bumpy road. I'll move like this and he'll talk while the road is, because there's an actual weight to him.
How do we behave as human beings, and what kind of culture are we living in Canada? Especially with the United States, it's kind of Big Brother next door. Inside all the comedic satire folk is this desire to level the playing field, to speak truth to power.
Well, it's coming up on Halloween, and when we're recording this, it's about a couple of weeks away. So a podcast on Frankenstein's daughter, seems rather appropriate. But what is interesting about this conversation we're going to have today is because we're talking to two comedy legends, and I don't really think of Frankenstein as a comedy, but we're going to find out how that fits into that theme. My two guests, as I mentioned, are two legends of the comedy world. Michael Gellman is one of the founding forces behind the Second City training programs, both in Chicago and Toronto. His students and collaborators included Stephen Colbert, Tina Fey, Mike Myers, and countless others who have gone on to redefine comedy on stage and screen. He's now a resident of Stratford, and he and his wife, Deborah, have brought Process Theatre to Stratford, which is the production behind Frankenstein's daughter. And my other guest is Dan Castellaneta, who biggest role is the voice of Homer Simpson and many others on the Simpsons. But Dan and Michael go way back to Chicago and the Second City, and it's great to have both of you on the Stratford Slice. So welcome to Stratford, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So I don't think of Frankenstein in a comedy sense. So tell me I haven't seen the play yet. I'm seeing it next week. So what is Frankenstein's daughter all about, and how did you frame it as a comedy?
I like to primarily when writing plays or what have you, I like to write comedies primarily. And the basic tenets or the idea of it was that I had a dream where there was a guy who comes to a cabin. He's invited to a cabin and then winds up finding that there's another guy there that was also invited that he didn't know about. And they don't know whether he was invited, whether there was a mistake, or whether one or the other is not supposed to be there. So I thought that was an interesting start to a play. So I always had that idea rolling around in my head. And then the other thing was, I don't know, I just had a discussion with somebody about all the different Frankenstein movies, Son of Frankenstein and The Curse of Frankenstein. But it's like they always say Son of Frankenstein, or I think there was like the grandson or whatever. But I said, I never heard of the daughter of Frankenstein. So I thought that's a funny title, Frankenstein's daughter. And so I thought, well, let's see if I can marry that with the idea that I had. And so then we kind of weave that with the Frankenstein story, I guess. And it worked pretty well.
Were you inspired by Mary Shelley's work on Frankenstein, or just the name of the play?
Just the name,
okay.
Although I did then just read the book just to see if there was anything about it that I thought would be interesting. It's certainly interesting that Frankenstein was written by a woman.
Yeah.
And also the story is not quite like the classic movie with Boris Karloff. But that was the idea. That was the basic idea. And I started writing the first scene and then figured how we make it Frankenstein's daughter. And so we had a doctor in a character they talk about, Dr. Stein. And her first name is Frances Stein. And her father's name is Franklin. So, and oddly enough, it turned out that there is a movie. It's a very cheap, bad, you'd almost say C-level movie called Frankenstein's Daughter.
Yeah,
but
1953, I think.
Really horrible. I saw it. I think they even made fun of it on Mystery Science Theater.
Well, Frankenstein's an interesting topic today because it's obviously about the creation of a monster and humanity's control over reproduction. And now we have AI. So I was wondering if there was any sort of backstory about how the commentary about Frankenstein is relevant today. Do you see anything in that, either of you?
Well, I think what's really interesting is the classic horror story format is the human becomes inhuman, and the inhuman, the monster, becomes more human. And I don't know if Dan really, but that takes place in this play. Is the person that we are most worried about and who is the most psychologically insecure becomes really strong at the end, and vice versa. The person that we think is really strong becomes is revealed.
Yeah, it's revealed to be incredibly vulnerable. Yes,
Yeah,
that's true.
and a little crazy, a
Yeah.
lot crazy.
Yes.
And what do you opened this week? What do you hope audiences take away from this production? Is there any sort of underlying message that you're trying to get out there?
I would say that primarily, I mean, there's a lot to do with the like therapies and so forth, and that the basic idea of it is that I think therapy is very helpful, and know lots of people. First of all, my sister is a therapist, and we have friends who are. But at the same token, they'll even tell you that it's still up to the patient to kind of know they're really responsible for their achieving health, mental
And
health and
recovery.
well-being. It's their decision, and sometimes they have to make the decision to say my therapy is done or I need to go back. So it's seems to that sort of seems to me to be the theme that it ultimately is still up to the person seeing the therapist that they're responsible for their ultimately for their well-being.
Now, Michael, you've written books on comedy and you've taught. What role does comedy play in therapy and health and well being? Tell me about that connection.
Um, uh, the uh, I don't know. I really don't know. Everybody's so individual,
Yeah.
and more comedy, at least improvisation, especially, is being used to for various kinds of therapies. I remember there was a Gilda's Club had just started, and I taught workshops for people who were, many of them were terminal or diagnosed terminal with cancer. And we'd do workshops, and everyone was laughing and having a great time and just loved it and connected with each other. And so, even though they were going through this extraordinary, difficult time in their lives, uh, ended up being able to process it better because they were laughing and playing and using improvisation. And so more and more improvisation has been, when we were just starting, it was just theater. And even then, theater didn't consider it
You weren't serious.
Yeah, it
real
wasn't
theater.
legitimate. Yes.
Yeah, it was illegitimate theater. And so, but now it's being used all over the place, corporate to train salespeople and
Yeah.
stuff like that, but also being used in therapy for a variety of different. I There's a woman that I've come to know a little bit named Margot Escott who lives in Florida, and she has written several books on how to utilize improvisation and comedy, which kind of lends itself to the human comedy and people laughing at themselves and each other. And they're using it quite extensively now as
Wow.
like a group therapy session. It's not a bunch of people sitting in a circle. It's a
Right.
bunch of people getting on their feet and playing with each
Mhm.
other. And that,
And reducing barriers and just
Yes.
being vulnerable, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. A while back too, in the 80s, David Shepard, who was one of the founders of the Compass Players that became the Second City, would take groups of different from different communities and have them improvise together, including guys who are people who are cops and people who were like former, prisoners, former criminals, and they would improvise together. And he would take different or like seniors and teenagers and stuff. So groups that would normally not associate with each other got to play with each other and saw that there was some commonality, found commonality between each other.
And I think that was absolutely the roots of improvisational theater. Viola Spolin wrote a book, and it sort of became the Bible, but it was all about kids who came from 20 different countries, and had immigrated to the U.S., and particularly in Chicago. And these kids wouldn't even speak the same languages often, but they came together and played, and a lot of them became actors, and they went into theater.
Yeah.
Let's go back to those early days. So, Michael, you're from Minneapolis. Dan, you're from Chicago. Tell us about how you guys met and the early days of Second City.
Yeah. So, well, Michael, you can start because you started in the 70s. I started in the 80s.
I'm terrible. I actually started when I was 16 years old in 1968. I became a stage manager for a theater, and they were doing satire. And it was written by 3 journalists from the Minneapolis Star and Tribune. It was 2 papers then. And they were terrific writers, and they wrote for 10 years. And then a guy from Second City came up, and he joined the cast in Minneapolis at Dudley Riggs' Brave New Workshop. And Dudley was a circus guy, and he went to college and then came out and went to created this satire theater and coffee house. Of course, had to have espresso coffee. It was the 50s. So he taught us improv. This guy that came up from Second City taught us how to improvise. And for my part, I went, "This is amazing. Where did you learn this stuff?" And he went, "Oh, Second City, Chicago." I said, "Okay, I'm going there." And I did. And I bugged the hell out of them. God, I was a pest. Until they finally said, "Okay, you want a job here?" "Yes." And they gave me one amazingly. I was acting, but I also had to like clean the toilets and host at night, take tickets, and
Do everything.
yeah, and wash dishes. David Mamet taught me how to wash dishes at Second City. And he said, "Okay, you put the glasses here, and then you put it in the second bin, and then you put it in the third bin, and that's how you do it. You think you effing got it?" And I went, "Yeah, I got it." And he goes, "Okay, I got to go. My play American Buffalo's opening tonight."
It's like, oh, yeah. Oh, good for you, David. You got a play going. Good for you.
And Dan, your career came from the theater world as well. You were a Shakespeare actor and various things like that before.
I did do some. I did some Shakespeare. I did. My professor I was in Northern Illinois. She started a Shakespeare company, and we performed outdoor in the park, and then we did Taming of the Shrew and also Midsummer Night's Dream. So yeah, I got a little Shakespeare background, and but the Second City happened because also in college I was working with a guy who was doing his graduate dissertation on Viola Spolin, and so in order to do that, he needed to do the games, and so he got a group of people together, and I go, this is great. And at the same time, there was a guy I met who had been in the touring company of Second City. He said, "You ought to go down there and audition." And then I had a cousin, maybe you know her, Patty Backus. She was a waitress there at Second City.
Yeah.
She'd also told me. So then I auditioned a couple of times and got in.
And that's where you met Michael.
I met and also where I met my wife. My wife was in Second City classes, improv, and she also wrote a little bit she wasn't a performer, but she wrote. And I'd be remiss to say that she is also the author of Frankenstein's Daughter, that she wrote the play. So then There was a guy by the name of Don DePaulo, who very great, funny improviser who taught classes there, and then he invited Michael to teach us some stuff, and then I don't know how we wound up getting together to do the Seed Show, but then that was how we collaborated again using improvisation to create um, theater.
It was really exciting time in Chicago because there were all sorts of innovative things happening. When I first got to Second City, it was satire, but it was scenes, blackout songs, and there wasn't anything much over 6, 7 minutes. And that's what the world thought of improvisational theater or comedy satire is, a short scene, blackout, short scene, blackout. And we started experimenting with improvising full plays
Right.
and doing what's now called long form, which was, all these formats for performance. And now they're sort of part of the fabric. I mean, people talk about them, younger people that I'm teaching talk about them as if that is what improvisation is. So it was very exciting because we created this whole kind of uh, new pathway for it, new ideas, and exploring and experimenting. And people are still doing it. They're still growing.
Yeah.
I, I'm really interested in exploring the evolution of comedy because I grew up with Wayne and Schuster, and they had
Yeah.
short scenes and various things like that. And I just came back from TIFF, and one of the main films at TIFF was about John Candy, and
Uh-huh.
the other
Oh
one
yeah.
about Godspell. And it all has a connection to Second City because when Second City opened in Toronto, they discovered all of this Canadian talent, and we built our own homegrown industry, which then got exported to the States. So tell me about the migration of the Second City concept to Canada and how it became kind of a seeding ground for new talent.
Well, I think everybody's not around, so I can tell the story. the uh, in 19 early 70s, uh, Bernie Sahlins, who produced the Chicago Second City, thought Toronto and Chicago were very similar cities, and at that time they were. And they were sister cities. And he opened up a show, and it lasted a couple months and flopped. And a restaurant guy named Andrew Alexander, who is Canadian, went down, and the associate producer said, "Come on down, talk to Bernie." So he did. And he said, "Look, I know you messed up. I can fix it. Give me the rights to Second City in Canada, and I will give it a hit, and you will make money." And he did because he knew what Canadians wanted to have as for a show and what was funny to Canadians. And he cast a lot of it out of the Godspell show that was there then, and they had a little tiny stage in a little tiny place before they moved to the fire hall, which a lot of people might remember. And that's when I first saw that, met the cast. They didn't have a touring company, and they had demands for it.
Yeah.
So we would come up from Chicago when I was in the touring company and do shows here in Canada. And it was so much fun. And so the two casts kind of came together and shared it. And most of us are still friends.
It's
So,
amazing.
yeah.
Well, there were two documentaries at TIFF this year, one on Godspell with
Hmm.
Eugene Levy and Paul Schaefer and Martin Short. And then there was the other one with about John Candy.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. And I want to ask you this question, Dan, as a performer. What is it about Canadians that seem to resonate in the American comedy market? Because there's a list as long as my arm of Canadians who have gone down to great success there.
I really don't know. Um, I mean, I love all those people, and they were my heroes. I can't really. I think there's sort of like the only thing I can think of is the there seems to be it's satire, but it seems to be with a little bit more fun behind it, a little more self-deprecation behind it. It seems like American humor is a little much more edgier and a little harder, whereas the Canadian is a little more laid back and a little more, uh, I guess, friendly, even though it's still skewering. But that's just my general feeling about the difference between the Canadians and American humor. Um, and of course, obviously, cultural and references. Although it's funny that the they talked about when SCTV was doing, they were doing a lot of stuff that was basically American pop culture, and then
That's
of course
right.
Bob and Doug came out only because they said you need Canadian content. So they said, "Oh, you mean we'll just put on toques and say a lot and drink beer?" And they said, "Yes." That's what they did, and it became a huge hit. This funny thing too about that was, at that time, my wife Deb Costa, who was also the co-author of this play, she was working in advertising, and she pitched Bob and Doug for a particular. I think it was for Pizza Hut or something like that, and they said, "Well, nobody knows these guys, blah blah blah." And then, literally, like about a month or two later, they were hawking Coors beer or
That's
something,
right.
and so she knew that Americans would really take to those
Well, I just read recently
hosers.
that Rick and Dave are getting together for a reunion and
I
doing
heard
Strange
that.
Brew too. And
Yeah,
there's a real, what I got from Tiff was there's a real nostalgia right now for comedy legends and a look back at what role comedy does play in shaping our culture. And I don't know who told me this, but there's one theory about that question I was asking you, Dan, about why Canadian seems to resonate. And it's that we're living next to the United States. So we're looking at the United States from a distance, and we're sort of outside observers, which allow
yeah,
us more creative freedom to poke fun or see through the myth of the American dream, I suppose.
yeah. I guess you could say that it's sort of, yes. I think that's probably why they were so successful, because a lot of things Americans are blind to,
That's right.
and then the Canadians pointed out. Uh, Americans go, "Oh yes, of course, we are that."
Yeah. I think too, the U.S., at least back a little ways, was a little more political in
Yes, at that
in the
time.
tradition of Will Rogers
They
and
took
Lenny
themselves very
Bruce.
seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, they took the work seriously. I'm not sure
Right.
they took themselves
Okay.
seriously. That old. But with you go back to Mark Twain and Will Rogers and Lenny Bruce and those kinds of people were really pointed satire. And Canada, always thought, as I was working here a lot, was more cultural.
Yeah.
It was like, how do we behave as human beings, and what kind of culture are we living in Canada? Especially with the United States, it's kind of big brother
Yeah.
next door, and that affects so much of what happens
Yeah.
here.
Well, it's interesting to trace the line from Second City Chicago to Second City Toronto, SCTV, Godspell, Saturday Night Live. They're all related
Hmm.
in a way.
Oh, deeply connected
Yeah.
in terms of personnel, in terms of philosophy, in terms of comedy style.
Yeah.
It's
As a matter of fact, Deb and I are listening to the a book, Lorne, about Lorne Michaels, and he was around when the God production of
Yeah, that's
Godspell
right.
was going on,
Yeah.
so he already knew those guys. I think I'm not positive, but he wanted to try to get them. I think they were even part of stuff he produced up here,
Yeah, he did a
but
CBC show. I
he
can't remember what
did.
it's called,
Yeah,
but Martin Short was on that show.
yeah.
Yeah.
mhm,
So he already kind of had, and of course Dan Aykroyd
Yeah.
and Gilda Radner. He already had a line on them,
yeah.
and
That
they
was
were.
my first cast. The Canadians were doing a 1 month. The two casts, US and Canada, traded
That's
places
Yeah.
right.
for a month to get a show up. And so they said, well, you're going in when Bill Murray leaves. So why don't you go work out with the Canadians for 30 days and get your sea legs? And so the cast was Aykroyd and Candy and
Wow.
Gilda and Catherine O'Hara, and I signed our contracts on the same day.
Was it
So
Valerie Bromfield? there?
She
Was
she wasn't
there
she wasn't there
at
then.
then?
Yeah, and um, I forgot who it was,
Well,
but
Jane Eastwood was also
oh, Jane
around.
Eastwood,
Yeah,
that's who
yeah,
it was.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. She was in Godspell, and
Even at the time I was there, they were always doing cross fertilization, and I was slated to go up to Canada to. I think I was supposed to take the place of Colin Mockery because he had, I guess, had a gig or something that took him out. But then we were putting up a show. It was right at the time we were putting up a new show, so they wouldn't let me go. But I was almost looking. I mean, it was all. I was looking forward to almost going there
yeah.
up to Toronto and performing for a few months.
And Toronto was Canada, and Toronto was just exploding
yeah,
at that time. You know, there was Passe Muraille doing, and paper wheat was being done out in Alberta, and so all this devised theater was being created and produced, and theater companies were exploding in Toronto and opening and doing all Canadian content, Canadian playwrights,
yeah.
and it wasn't, you know, before Second City and before that theater movement, there was like the plays were well, it's they'd always end the same way: a husband and wife in front of a sod house going, "Well, we're doing okay, mother. We sure are, father." And the lights would slowly
Slowly.
fade to back. And so these guys were doing like, oh, what's really happening? They were holding a mirror up to Canadian society, and people flocked to it. It was such an exciting time to be in Toronto and working.
I grew up in Stratford, so I've seen the evolution of a lot of things in town. And what I'm seeing recently is a lot more broadening of the culture, diversifying of the economy, creative economy, that is. Tell me about why you moved to Stratford and what your goals are for Process Theater, the company that you've started.
Um, well, process, we started in Chicago, and because my wife,
You
um,
both have wives
We
named
both
Deb.
have
yeah,
wives
we
named
do,
Deb, yeah.
and it gets confusing
A lot of Debs
sometimes.
out there.
But Deborah Ann Smith, and she created the St. Lawrence Shakespeare Festival. She went to Lambda in England, came back and said, "I want to do Shakespeare." She was in East by the river, and she said, "No one's doing it. I guess I'll just do it myself." And so she created it's still a theater company that's still going and doing very well. And so she's always had the desire to create theater and do those kinds of projects. So we started in Chicago. We brought it to Northumberland, where we moved to from Chicago. And we've just started doing it. We created storefront theater there, and in a little tiny storefront. And we sometimes worked in a tent. And we've been creating theater since then. And so why did we move to Stratford? Because two friends of ours from Northumberland said, you should think about living here. So we went to visit them, and they own a bed and breakfast here. And we went, well, this is really nice. And they said, look online, look, there's all these houses for sale. We went, gee, that's affordable. And at the time it was.
Yeah.
And they said, well, think about it. So we have a real estate agent who's a friend of ours, they said.
Planning all
So,
along.
oh my God, they were Machiavellian about it, but we were sold instantly.
Yeah.
Because when you say in a lot of places, anywhere, oh, I'm an actor or I'm in theater, they say, what have I seen you in? Have you been in any commercials? And here in Stratford, when you say I'm in the arts, they
Yeah.
go, oh, that's great. And
Yeah.
they can talk one-on-one with you about
That's right.
what you're doing and your techniques and how. So that's very exciting to have that kind of community of people who
Yeah.
support one another here.
And Dan, you grew up in Chicago, so what was your awareness of Stratford with your Chicago roots?
When I was going to college in the mid to late 70s, I was involved with the theater department, and I always hear about them having junkets to go to Stratford to see Shakespeare and things like that. But I was never that bold of a traveler, I was not invited for whatever reason. But I always heard about Stratford, and of course, and my wife, she actually had been here when she was in college, I think at the time, and saw plays. So I'd always wanted to go up and see it and see what was going on. So finally made it up here.
Good for you. I want to talk a bit about the role of comedy and satire in society. And I'm going to go back to the time when I lived in England when Spitting Image was on the air. And of course, they took the Mickey, as they say in England, of the royal family of prime ministers. It was a puppet show that they did.
Hmm.
And then, of course, in Canada, we have This Hour is 22 Minutes, and we have various things like that.
Yeah.
And, I'm wondering what role, because we're seeing a lot of tension now in the United States about comedy and the role of satire. What is important, and how has satire and comedy evolved over the last 20 or 30 years?
Mm.
Have we lost the ability to make fun of ourselves?
I don't think so. I just think that now, because everything is the media has changed, and you have the with everything on the internet, and instead of one talk show in the United States, the Johnny Carson show, you have five different ones, and then you have actual show, and you have shows like The Daily Show and John Oliver. I mean, it's just all spread out more. But I think the satire is just as good, if not better, in some respects than stuff that Mort Saul was doing, and even more incisive and more cutting. It's just that the audiences are no more niche now; they're smaller, as opposed to the entire United States kind of viewing it together.
Yeah. You
And in the
don't
an-
hear, did you see Carson last night?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the only thing. And in the animation world, we've got South Park, Simpsons, Beavis and Butthead, Family Guy, all doing
I,
satire of the current.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think the cartoon medium is much more powerful than live, than stand-ups or satire companies or whatever, because they can get. I think a cartoon character can get away with a lot
Oh
more.
my God. There is a line. I mean, although it wasn't during the Vietnam War, but it was, I don't think he'd get away with it for live, but it was, they were watching, Bart and Lisa were watching, uh, uh, what is the, Schoolhouse Rock, kind of a parody of Schoolhouse Rock. And because they'd taken Itchy and Scratchy off the air. And so they're going, what? Lisa goes, Bart goes, what is this junk? And Lisa goes, oh, this is some throwback thing that appeals to the, which generation? The Gen Xers or something. Yeah, to Gen Xers. And Bart goes, we need another Vietnam to thin out their ranks a little.
And you couldn't get away with that in live with people. I
Yeah, it
don't.
would be more, yeah, suspect, yeah. In cartoons, it kind of just goes by, you really have to, people seem to accept it more.
It was interesting to note that when Colbert's show got canceled or will be canceled, and then Jimmy Kimmel got taken off the air, it was almost like a red flag for a comedy. And Jimmy Kimmel has bounced back, and he's getting more
Yeah.
viewers than he ever before. And then there was the Beavis and Butthead thing. It's almost. Is it true that comedy people like when they see that, it's like a red flag, and they drop everything and push even harder? Do you think there's more? Do you think it was a benefit to have that thing happen because it reinforced the power and influence of comedy? Because it's not. They're fighting back, right?
Yes. That's it. They're going, real satire it basically punches up. It attacks the power structures. And so that's who they're going after. And of course, if they hit them, they're gonna hit back with humor. And
If personally, I feel like I have to. It's harder to get up off the couch these days. It just is
It's
harder.
depressing.
Huh?
Depressing?
No,
Oh,
because it's physically harder. I'm 73 years old.
okay.
And but nowadays I am absolutely motivated to get up off the couch and to start doing things. And I had sort of held back and I was teaching and life was good. And now I absolutely, without question, want to stand up, speak out, and do what's needed. Because that's, I think, inside all the comedic satire folk is this desire to level the playing field, to speak truth to power, to do that sort of thing, and it's a drive. It's a way we have an ability to do it with comedy and to make people laugh. Bernie Sahlins used to say that if an audience goes to Second City um, and they laugh, that's good. But if they start arguing about it in the car on the way home, that's the best because they're thinking about it and it hits
They,
them hour later.
yeah, certain thoughts and are being challenged, or accepted norms are being challenged.
Yeah,
What we
Uh,
talked earlier about therapy, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about this because as Canadians, we're feeling under pressure now
yeah.
because of the threats of the trade war and annexation of Canada. How can we as Canadians find humor in that? Because that's very hard to laugh at right now. Do you think?
I, all of the stuff that we did in Second City wasn't about that specifically. It was about how people are affected. So, how has your behavior changed since all that started? I go to the grocery store, read the labels, and I look for product of Canada. I do not want to send my money there. It's a way of doing it. That's something we do now as Canadians. I mean, did you ever go to the
No.
supermarket and look for whether it was a product of Canada or not? And now we do. So the scene that you would create for Second City would be about the guy in the grocery store who's trying to read the label and the lady who's asked, just two people meeting in the grocery store, and that's where the satire
Yeah.
comes from.
there's an interesting. I mean, I saw an example of that. It was a guy on YouTube who was saying, he was talking about the tariffs and stuff, and he goes, "Well, and he had a business, and he was clearly pro-Trump and all that, but he says, "Don't worry about tariffs. Everything I'm what I'm doing is made locally and all la la." But he found out that all of the then there were clips later on where he found out the machinery that made his product are coming from other countries, and they doubled in price, and you could sort of see the guy struggling.
Yeah.
And I mean, that would make if you just exaggerated, that's a funny
Yeah.
satire of how somebody s- can't figure out that they screwed themselves.
Yeah.
And
So,
yeah, it's so interesting to realize that most of what we do, at least in our limited lane, is about human behavior, like any other theater.
yeah.
And it's not like shouting and yelling, Nixon or Eisenhower, which is what satire was in the 50s when Second City started. Was, boy, you just mention Eisenhower in
Yeah.
a sketch, and oh my God, it would be in the newspapers, and people would be yelling and screaming. And now it's about how do human beings, how has what they're doing
Yeah.
affect human behavior? And that is very powerful.
And Dan, what's different about being a voice actor doing satire rather than a person who's standing in front of an audience in a
Mm.
theater? Is there a different nuance involved in that performance style?
Well, I mean, it's the obvious things. Of course, is uh, you're there in real time in front of an audience, and you're getting an actual audience response, as opposed to when you're doing voice. That's all recorded, and then it's interpreted by your voice track is interpreted by the animators, and uh, it's directed a certain way, and then uh, the only response we ever really get is when we do read-throughs and there's an invited audience, usually friends or family members of the writers or whoever's on the staff, so that you can hear kind of what people respond to. Um, the only thing again is sometimes their standards and practice will kind of push us a little bit, but the interesting thing about our show is that we don't. Jim Brooks, who is the producer of the show, and uh, he got a deal because of who he is, because he was the creator of Mary Tyler Moore Show and Taxi and all the great shows. That there are no network notes, so we're able to do pretty much anything we want. There are times where standards and practice will push back, and there have been times where we have changed things, but for the most part, we're able to do pretty much anything we want to do, and so the only censorship is our ourselves.
And are you grabbing from the headlines? And is there more sensitivity now about what's going on or what you can and cannot say? Or how?
There's a little bit, awareness of that, although we also we even touch on it. But you can't be too, because you can't be too
On the nose?
timely, I
timely,
guess
yeah,
it is,
yeah.
because animation takes about 9 or
Yeah.
10 months to complete, and then there's even a few more months of post-production. So whatever's going on at the time that we're recording the show, it will completely change.
Unlike monologues like Jimmy
Yeah.
Kimmel is immediate.
Right, Jimmy Kimmel
Yeah.
can do things that are happening immediately that day,
And when you're a voice actor and you have a new character, how do you imagine that person's life to create something that's nuanced and different from the other voices that you're doing?
You this a lot of times the writers will give you a kind of a guideline in the script. Um, and a lot of times you just you steal from other, like, voices from the past, your radio. There was and they would even say, for instance, there'd be like, we had a supervisor at the DMV that goes over, that supervises Patty and Selma, and I basically do the imitation of Droopy Dog, who is I guess, Wally Wimple, and he would talk like this, So I did that, and then they'd be happy with that kind of a voice. It depends. Sometimes I will do different kinds of voices there right at the recording studio, and they'll either say, more this, more that, until I hit it.
And then you have to remember that.
Yeah, I'll have to remember it, or they'll just play it back for me because
Yeah.
it's being recorded
right.
too, if it's a new voice.
But the regular voices like Krusty and Homer, you've got them down.
Yeah, I got those down.
Yeah.
I've been doing those for 40 years almost.
Now, how did your Second City training help you with this? And did you ever imagine that your voice would be your main note of performance?
The only thing that we do a little bit of improv because it's so
You don't,
easy.
or you do? Sorry,
We do
on Simpsons. Yeah,
on Simpsons, and as a matter of fact, Hank Azaria has a little improv background. Julie Kavner has some,
Mhm.
and Harry Shearer, and so there are times where we would do it as written, and then we would improvise it.
and they animate to
And
that.
either
yeah.
they'll
yeah.
keep it or they won't. I remember even doing Parks and Rec, because some of the Simpson writers went there, and also on The Office, and they would do as written, and then they would say, kind of change it if you want, and they'll use it or not use, or use pieces of it. But for the doing voices, the only thing I can think of is that you try to, the more real or believable the person is that they're seeing, even if they're in cartoon form, the funnier it will be, because it's actually, whatever goofy thing is happening, it's really happening,
Yeah.
And so I try to, if Homer's like driving on bumpy road, I'll move like this, and he'll talk while the road is, because there's an actual weight to him uh, in the car, going over the road or whatever. Or if he's in pain, you really want to make it sound like he's really in pain, not just a cartoony kind of
Mm.
thing. I think even Jim Brooks had told us we want, don't forget these are real people, even though everything's heightened to a certain degree. We want everybody at home. So some of the stuff from Second City, I can think if because a lot of it's physical. It's not just being glib too, or it's you because we have nothing. There's nothing on the stage. You have to use your body to evoke an environment or a place. So in order to convince people, so in that way, you're kind of doing that as a voiceover actor.
Yeah. I think too the two guys we cast for Frankenstein's daughter are both Second City guys. So
Really?
like the whole crew had a common language, a common way of working, and a lot of it has to do with if you perform comedy 8 nights a week, 8 shows per week, and you do it for 3 years, day in, day out, you have an innate understanding of comedy timing,
Hmm.
of how to work with people, how to make the other person look better, and that made it easy to direct this show that's playing here in
Hmm.
Stratford, but it's also for any time I've ever seen Second City trained actors working in comedy, there's just an organic, innate sense of how to do it well without having to rehearse it and over and over. They just you put my I was really worried about Frankenstein's daughter, and my wife says, "You've cast two racehorses. Just let them run."
Yeah,
And I went,
exactly.
Yeah,
"Yeah," and I did, and it's like they did great.
that is the thing about Second City actors or improv actors. Whether it's on stage or doing television, and they're very used to getting changes thrown because changes are constantly coming their way. And I have seen the difference between somebody with that background versus somebody who doesn't have that, and they're a little more thrown by changes. Whereas I if you had the experience of, especially if you improvise something, what something that's really being said for the first time would sound like, even though it's in the script and you're going to say it several times. You know that you have to make it sound like you're saying it for the first time, and so you have that experience of making it real, like it's happening for the first time, and that's when the audience believes it, and you they buy into what you're doing.
And how has your success as a voice actor helped you do some of these projects like Frankenstein's daughter? What are your sort of passions? Next project, like what else are you working on that might be we might be able to see?
I mean, the thing that's it's primarily help is that voice acting doesn't take as much time as doing on camera. So I'm free to do a lot more working with improvisation. And Deb and I are, Deb LaCosta, are working on uh, using improvisation to create a play right there in front of an audience. Like just get a group of actors together, have them trained, and then go to the audience and say, "Can we have a location?" And then we start the play. We start
Yeah.
with two people, and then
And
uh,
audience interaction somehow sometimes,
there's
or
no
oh, no
no
audience.
real
Okay,
audience interaction other than when they a suggestion of,
okay,
or we may say in this if there's the second act, we go, what two characters do you want to see
yeah,
in the opening scene?
Mhm.
But
And that was a big part of that stuff that was happening in the mid '80s in Chicago
right,
with taking it out of just the comedy satire format of scene, blackout,
yeah,
song, scene, black. And we were working on improvising one act plays
yeah.
and full length plays. And it was extraordinary. And
So
some of it would be just awful, but
yeah.
we were learning.
So what's next for Process Theater? You're getting this show, which has been sold out, so obviously not everybody's going to get a chance to see it. What's your grand vision for Stratford and Process Theater?
Well, my Deborah wants to.
Good thing you're not both Michael.
that would
really
really be
confuse
confusing. She would like to do small productions. I would like to do environmental specific pieces, and dark comedies we really enjoy. So those kinds of shows, which are intimate, they're what they called kitchen sink drama in Chicago. Your audience is right there. I'd like to do those kinds of projects
Yeah.
that that audiences that maybe that aren't readily available
Yeah.
everywhere, because they're oddball comedies,
Yeah.
And Deb and Dan are really good at writing. Maybe we'll do another one of their plays. I don't know.
Well, Dan,
We'd
you've
love
dipped your toe in the Stratford water, so
Yeah.
hopefully you'll come and buy a house here.
Put some
and-
more toes in there.
Well, I want to end on a lighter note. One thing about The Simpsons that I love is it represents every town everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if how would looking around Stratford, how would Homer Simpson react to what he sees here from his observations so far?
I don't see a big brewery. I hear you like beer up here, but so far I haven't seen any indication of it.
Terrific. And Michael, any more information about Frankenstein's Daughter we can share, or how people can get? Will you do another run? How will people see it if it's sold out?
Process Theater has a website, and it's easy clicks to buy tickets and to find out more about what we're doing and this show and Deb and Dan. So processtheater.com.
Terrific. Well, it's so great to have you living in Stratford. And Dan, thank you for gracing Stratford with your presence.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being here for me to be here.